Released nearly a year ago, Defiance was billed as a third-person shooter MMO with a bit of Borderlands here, a bit of World of Warcraft there, and numerous other influences scattered throughout. Now, after the largest combination DLC patch yet, it's time for a second look at the game to see what's come of it. At launch, Defiance was riddled with bugs and connectivity issues. Thankfully, the servers are now much more stable and some of the bugs have been eradicated. Except for that last part, it's totally still a buggy mess. Sometimes enemies won't render for several seconds, you'll frequently spawn intersecting with geometry, or any number of other issues. Still, the gameplay itself is pretty solid. Despite featuring an over-the-shoulder third-person camera, the game lacks a dedicated cover system, instead leaving players to awkwardly cling to the edges of poorly defined barriers. It's not exactly game-breaking, but it is something of a break from the expectations of the genre, and it can be a bit jarring at first. Even more jarring are the game's cluttered controls, which can actually be defended. The game is an MMO after all, and there's a slew of social options available. Much of this is accessed through the D-pad and an overtasked radial menu, and it feels a bit clunky to be honest. Still, they did what they could with what they had, and I believe their efforts should be commended. Graphically, Defiance has its moments of surprising beauty, but usually the game looks like something that would have been possible on the PS2. Poor texture resolution, washed out colors, low poly models, and issues with pop-in, not just of textures but entire meshes, are only compounded by the low internal resolution and muddy attempt at anti-aliasing. It's a shame the game isn't prettier, because a good chunk of your time will be taken up by just standing there, staring blankly at the screen, not really sure what to do. And that's really the core of the game's problem. There's a complete lack of direction that's been a pervasive issue since launch a year ago. While the latest combination DLC patch does manage to add a sense of progression, there still isn't that much to actually work toward. Nearly the entire map is open right from the start of the game, and there is a sizable section that's blocked off until you progress through the entirely forgettable campaign, but there's no reason to cross the bridge. Combat there is noticeably more challenging, but without a corresponding increase in drop rates of high-quality gear, there's no incentive to be down there. And this is where the newest update bites the game in its ass. Low-level players can play with high-level players, but the enemies scale according to the perceived threat level of the combined players in the combat zone. Players whose levels are under the average get their level temporarily bumped up so they can still participate. Now this sounds fine on paper, and I wish that it was, but it has some issues. To demonstrate, please take the time to enjoy this clip of me dying repeatedly at the hands of horribly buffed enemies. Please note that it is not sped up or edited in any way, and I am not the only one getting one-hit killed as I spawn. Defiance is a rare game that doesn't make me upset over its flaws. It is instead a game that makes me depressed. Defiance has an incredible amount of potential to be an incredibly fun experience, but when it's still having growing pains and a waning population a year after release, even I have to admit that it's not going to make it. Bottom line, I wish I could recommend Defiance, but I just can't.